26th already, believe it or not, of something. Where are you tonight, Dana? Are you coming back or what? I don't know what's going on. What else is unusual? Fix to stop the leak at Excel's nuclear plant in Minnesota did not work. So Edwin Lyman from the Union on Concerned Scientists. It's the 26th of March. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406.
From all of you good workers, good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on?
So I chose that song because I'm thinking about how appropriate it is that a group or a community stands up against the evil machine in their midst. And you can't smell radiation or see it or touch it or feel it or pick it up or perceive it, right? And children are at least 100 times more vulnerable. And that the emissions from these places 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And so, I got no idea what's going on here tonight. But we'll figure it out, I'm pretty sure. We got a poll for everybody tonight. Does the UK depleted uranium munitions, also known as dirty bombs, that are sent to Ukraine, constitute collective punishment? So the dirty bombs, these are dirty bombs. These are already gone through chain reaction and they're left over from the fuel process or weapons process. They're 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And so when you shoot that, it liquefies it travels you have a high velocity and it catches fire. And so it's releasing these physical atoms and particulates of nuclear waste into the environment, into the water tables, into the farms, into the communities, right? It drifts with the air. And ends up in your food chain and destroys the food chain and the species and the biota in increments. And it's a very slow, what they call a slow kill, but it's a kill. And there's 1,800 diseases that comes with anthropogenic man-made radiation. And so I'm confused what's going on. So let's keep rolling here. Fix to stop the leak at Monticello's on the Mississippi River, Minnesota, did not work. This is a really interesting story. Company is voluntarily shutting down the plant. Of course, nuclear, you got better chances of getting hit by a Soviet satellite in the nuclear industry doing something moral and ethical. doing something moral and ethical. That's having a few problems here tonight. Bear with me. I'll try to figure it out. There we go. Who knows? The company is voluntarily shutting down. You have to give me a few minutes because I'm always having little issues. Not always, rarely, but I have been known to have issues sometimes with my equipment. And yeah, it looks better on this screen. The company wanted to resolve the leak immediately rather than wait for the scheduled shutdown, which is in a couple of weeks, it's almost 3 weeks, for refueling. We want to put this behind us, Clark said, now Clark is the president of Excel, and I had raised those questions on Friday's show. Why didn't they just tell us where it is, what it is, show us pictures, the videos through the media, which is the norm, right? And then allay everybody's fear. And said they're very secretive and they're very vague about any actual facets. In fact, watch the media go from tritium to radioactive chemicals in just a couple of days. So they got their memos. So our other plants can fill in pretty easy for Monticello's coming offline. Well, if that's the case, why didn't you do that 4 months ago when you discovered the leak? Why did you apply for an extension a month later and kept a secret for another 3 months? So 4 months total before coming out and saying something. And it's only when you said something and you got blowback that all of a sudden now you're going to take it offline. Why didn't you take it offline a couple of months ago? Wouldn't that make more sense? Or why did you wait 4 months to tell the population? As obviously knew about it before that. Claiming that everything is contained in a small area on the site that's got frost, 4 feet of frost. So this had no way of seeping into the ground because the ground is a block of ice, right? So this ran off. It can only run one place, downhill. That's the idea of the engineering. They spend around $500 million just on engineering these sites typically. And the idea is for it to run down. And they're usually built over an aquifer in case the reactor melts down into the earth. Most plants, that's their oh shit plan. So if it can the other plants can fill in pretty easy, why not just take it offline? Because it's old and decrepit, obviously. You don't even know where the leak was to. You admitted that in your first reports. We covered the first reports, right? So here's, now they're going to come out and tell us roughly, they're going to give us a visual, but not an actual context of where it's to. Discovered that a 3-inch pipe between the plant's reactor's turbine buildings had been leaking. Discovered that a 3-inch pipe, again, you probably got something like 60 miles of pipe on site. But this is radioactive water, and there's nothing on the site that's just tritiated water. And like if there was a big tank where they were storing their so-called tritiated water, then they would say the tank was leaking, right? But they're not. They're not telling you where it's coming from. So therefore, it can only be coming from, and they even name it the reactor. The plant's reactor, very vague again, right? Nuclear power plant. And the turbine building. The turbine building is pumping the water, right? So the only radioactive water that they can possibly talk about is that's in contact with the fuel. So it's going to be saturated, completely saturated. hundreds of billions of atoms per liter. It was infinitely more than that because you got to boil the water for 1 million people. So you can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. Just one of them can make you sick. And up to 1,800 different diseases besides cancer. So there's only a half-inch space between the buildings, but the pipe is 3 inches, making the leak hard to detect. Okay. Which is a total different story from the original story, which was they dug it up, it was in the ground. So now they're saying it's between the building, so it was hard to detect because you can visually see it. But because, how are you going to get something in there to fix it? How does that work? Excel remedied the leak about a month after detecting it. This is a total new fabrication now. Essentially, the company put a container under the pipe. So this is the second leak they're talking about. Essentially, the company put a container under the pipe to catch the leaking water. Yeah, but you just said it's a 3-inch pipe with only an inch space there. Try reaching in behind your dresser sometime and plug in a light bulb or a plug into the socket without moving the dresser. Making a leak hard to detect. And said they put a container, bear with me, beneath the pipe, because there's a lot to get through. The leak was severe enough to cause the container to overflow, leading to more tritium, 3H by the way, laced water. This is absurdness that suggests it's just tritium. This is a pressurized leak, I'm assuming, so it's aerosoled, so it's airborne. Within the last couple of days, this is why they're shutting it down, because it's a pressure. Otherwise, they can just route it around, see? But the leak was so severe to cause the container to overflow. Clark, which is the president of Excel, why is he the spokesperson instead of somebody that specializes in telling lies? Leading to more tritium-laced, no, tritium radioactive, this is not laced, this is radioactive water. The water itself is radioactive, it's not laced. Avoiding any kind of narrative where it talks about anthropogenic man-made radiation is what they're trying to frame it. Within the last couple of days, we realized the catchment no longer was capturing the water. They realized, so you weren't paying attention? Totally confused about this. Don't worry, we'll get through it. Edwin Lyman, you got the right name, from the Union of Unconcerned Scientists, which was started up in the Manhattan Project by the pro-nuclear industries academics, a.k.a. madmen, said Excel tried a quick patch and it failed. A quick patch. Again, nobody's identifying what it is, and we're talking about a nuclear power plant where you're not hiring some carpenter, with 2 years experience and going to send them in and put a patch on something, right? It doesn't work this way. This is somebody in the office playing with their hair, talking to their secretary, right? And this is the story that came out. Tried a quick patch and it failed. What? Tar and plywood? What are we talking about? The only thing could be leaking there because they're not vague. They're purposely refusing to identify where the water is coming from. It was not aware of another situation where a plant shut down only to address leaking tritium. I'm not aware of anything ever shutting down without it being to fix a leak that wasn't high pressure. And these things can run at 1,000, 2,000 psi. And so anything that's leaking, if that's what you want to call it, Even if these are pinholes, you're talking about huge numbers because it's under so much pressure, right? But that means you're going to aerosol it. It's a spray. So there's no way you couldn't see it. Let's put it that way. Huh. What's that over there, I wonder? There was no way they didn't know what was going on. But they had an application in to extend the license for 20 years. Now, the reason these plants were supposed to shut down in 30 years was the original charters, was because of the gamma shines, X-rays, neutron bombardments, beta rays, and everything else, destroyed the integrity of all the metal and iron and cement on the site. There's nothing immune to this stuff. But this is an interesting statement because it's, first off, it's coming from one of the apologists, which is the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. And we're well aware of Edwin Lyman, who repeatedly claims Chernobyl is infinitely worse than Fukushima, and has lied. We cover him maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks minimum for years. He's been a fixture at the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. A widespread problem for the nuclear industry over the past 2 decades. No, this has been going on for 80 plus years. Really, this just started 2 decades ago? That's news to me. And everybody else that knows anything about the industry. Shutting the plant down in response, so this is obviously a cover story, a very terrible one on top of that. Shutting the plant down in response would be a pretty extreme case, the Union of Unconcerned Scientists' little pet Panda said. Likely suggests there's a deeper issue. They're not shutting it down because they're nice people, because they're not nice people. You can't get a job there if you're a nice person. He said if it reaches the river, all 400,000 gallons, all 400,000 gallons all 400,000 gallons. I'm confused here. All at once, the volume of the river would dilute it. It doesn't dilute it, it spreads it out so everything becomes sick and dies. Almost to the limit of our detection. Again, these are not nuclear experts. This is the State Department of Public Health making an assertion that's impossible to quantify. It's impossible to quantify that assertion, right? How do you quantify that assertion? That's the big question. Bear with me, we're getting there. Well, like, the whole thing is dizzy, right? The whole thing is bloody dizzy because they refuse to tell you where are the people of those communities that are. There's a lot of communities downriver. This is the Mississippi River. So you said the river will dilute it. I can't get nothing right here. Don't worry, we'll get there. He says the river's going to dilute it. Again, like, all you're doing is spreading it. You can't destroy radiation even if you poured it into a battery acid, or you took it and burnt it in an incinerator at 5,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You can't destroy it. This is anthropogenic man-made radiation. It's not created by the sun. It's not created by the solar system. And so why did they come up with this bizarre cover story? Because they're going to have to stick with it. They can't keep changing it. That's twice now. This is the second story. And this is a very poor story. This obviously came from they contacted the Union of Unconcerned Scientists and says, how do we cover this up? I said, well, they have to talk to Edwin. He's the best cover-up we got. Community meetings held in Monticello following nuclear plant shutdown. Like, these are not community meetings. This is where they tell you that there's a bunch of tritium. Don't worry about it. We got everything under control. We're Excel. You don't need to worry about it. Go back to your daily life, pay your taxes, and shut up. I believe that's Clark right there. The president of a company. He hasn't got a hair out of place. Look. There's nothing that stresses him out. He's never lost a single hair. I bet you when he combs his hair, he doesn't even lose a hair. No visitors allowed, but you can have a farm built right up to the property if you want. The demonic demons. They're right on the freshwater river that people fish out of. There's a school 2 miles downriver, but that river travels all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean, right? This is one of the wells they got on site. This is far away from, uphill from the nuclear plant. This is where they're doing their tests to. They're not scumbags at all. There are cases, I'll tell you that much anyway. Everything runs downhill into the river. That's the point of it. Every time, and as the snow melts, it washes everything else. But the ground is frozen. So, how is everything going to be? You're talking about 10,000 45-gallon drums. This is a lot of water we're talking about that they emit to. How is that going to be soaked into a frosted 4 feet frost or, frozen ground? And that the river is right there. That's all the snow is going to melt and run into the river, or is it going to stay on site? Let's ask that question. What do you think the answer is? So they're covering it up, and that means it's much worse. And because they rolled out Valerie Myers from the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, I covered it on Friday, and she told everybody at the meeting, right, that it was like walking in sunshine. You get more radiation from sunshine than you do from nuclear. That's what she was telling them at the meeting. I put a video out because it upset me. Community. Now these two, they would sell your children into slavery in the drop of a hat if it meant it got on TV screen. So would he. So this lady in the blue doesn't understand nuclear, and she's upset. And so they played a little clip of her. Then they got him explaining, no, everything is contained to site. Right, got to hold. They're always got their hands. And that's Clark, the president of Excel, as far as I know. Everything is so vague. Oh, no, it's just tritium. Bring your kids down. Everything is safe. Go fishing. Everything is safe. And so they rolled out. They found the dumbest guy they could. Estimated extent of tritium impact. So they brought them in. The gray ones are soil probe locations. The one that looks like a radiation sign is and purple, future monitoring well locations. But that's not current ones. Why are you showing them future ones for it? These are hard cases. These are the monitoring sites they're claiming around the site. Well, there's no need to monitor uphill, right, per se, for radiation in the ground. And so they're saying there's nothing got into the ground. Well, where did it go? Where did 10,000 45-gallon drums go to? It has to go somewhere. It can't go in the ground because it's frozen. The river is right there at your fingertips. And it gathers up in a hurry. So if it was summertime, you can be looking at 5,000 becquerels a kilogram like there in Fukushima. This is a no man's land. So don't believe anything the Department of Health tells you or the crazy batshit lunatic media. Right? Tritium. To fix a tritium leak. There is no tritium pipes at nuclear power plants. I've been doing this for years and years and years. I've got no idea what they could possibly be talking about. And they don't either, because they're very careful not to say it's right here. Oh, it's between the two buildings, reactor and the turbine. If it's radioactive, and it's one of the lines from the turbines to the reactor, it's a high pressure line. There's no low pressure lines. There's no filtration system. There's no return low pressure filtration systems either. It's been going on a very long time. This is the Wigner effect, most likely. The gamma shines, the neutron bombardments is breaking down the integrity of the pipes. The high pressure will cause pinholes, but at 1,000 psi, 2,000 psi, it loses a lot. But that's going to be vapor. That's airborne. Is that what's going on, I wonder? Why are they? Because they're shutting down the reactor. The only reason you're not going to shut it down for a low pressure. So it's part of the main feed, which means you're talking about uranium, plutonium, curium, strontium, americium, plutonium. You're talking about, like, so it's so difficult if you're not familiar with the subject. I always try to throw in extra explanations to help you. And I understand, right, that things I take for granted you obviously don't. And so I got a tendency, like I showed you that headline with 5 million becquerels a kilogram. So think of the water at 5 million becquerels a kilogram, or think of the water as 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter. But think about it as being 20 million atoms of iodine-131 per liter. Multiply that by 10 to get to 132 per liter, and 30 times to get to 133 iodines per liter. Right? And 31 times of the iodine-131 ratio of 129 being produced with a 15 million year half-life. And because it's man-made, then your body has no autoimmune trigger for it, so it attacks it relentlessly for the rest of your life with white blood cells. So the more you bioaccumulate, the more compromised your immune system becomes. And this happens very quickly. If you're consuming, breathing, drinking it constantly, it's called leukemia, because you're producing more white blood cells than red blood cells. In order to produce a white blood cell, you got to displace your red blood cell. And let's keep going here. For the past few weekends, you'll see that mentioned there. For the past few weekends, well, they only acknowledged the leak 6 days ago. And this is Sunday, so they acknowledged it. We covered it when the story broke. The talk of the town, not the last few weekends, because, the media only started reporting on it 6 days ago. The talk of the town has been dominated by the nuclear leak. So they're at a restaurant in town weekends, so I don't know what they're talking about there. We'll keep an eye on that kind of stuff. And now 400,000 gallons of radioactive chemical. So I noticed a lot of media in the last number of days, last 3 days, have not said the word tritium, maybe once, but they'll call it radioactive elements or radioactive chemicals. Clark said the leak is fully contained, but there's two leaks, right? So the idea is to confuse you with the second leak, which is a couple of 100 gallons, and there's probably no second leak, right? That was just cooked up by the industry to leave some kind of confusion for people so they couldn't have a conversation, because it's difficult to, where they're so vague, it's very difficult, right? But I like the forensic investigative journalism, so I'll follow this story right till I can't follow it no more for years even. I'll gather everything about it, and that all gets aggregated, right? And we talk about it. Clark said the leak is fully contained to flush out better nuances. Bob Finkel, because you always got to find a useful idiot in these places, said he believes the officials. Now, why would you say something like that, Bob? Begins with B and ends with B. As always, the doomsayers are saying our fish are going to have 4 eyes in the Mississippi and stuff, says Finkel. So why quote a comment like that? Why throw the big turd in the punch bowl for it? Well, first off, surge in babies being born with extra arms and legs is actually real, Finkel. High numbers of stillbirths. Child's risk of cancer is up to 100 times higher than an adult, but it could take a decade or two to manifest, Bob. Radiation health specialists, children with over 11 becquerels a kilogram of cesium start to see heart problem, Bob. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram, Bob. And adults like you, Bob, with a lousy 50 becquerels a kilogram leads to irreversible lesions in your organs, Bob. You know that in the first year after Fukushima, there was over 865,000 cancers. Extra cancers. Which is just one of 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses, Bob, that'll manifest before cancer. 6 in 10 Fukushima children tested have diabetes a year later. So wait, bide your time, Bob. Don't write it off yet. 358,000 out of 1 million. That's what that study shows. Of children with thyroid tumors like 2 centimeters, and the thyroid gland is only 3 by 5 centimeters. Bob, go down and tell all those children about your triple eyes. Why does the media quote people like that? Because he probably doesn't even exist. Media just cooked it up, put it out there. Big turd in the punch bowl. Routine. The public is invited to be brainwashed at the open house at the Monticello Community Center on Monday. And they're going to roll out the crazies. I'll give you an example. Well, they already did, right? The last meeting, we covered it. Valerie Myers from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission came there and told everybody it was like walking in the sunshine. And we covered that in Friday's show. So I only had 1 day off. Just 6 shows in a row. I'll get a day off. Now I'm back for another 5 shows because of people like Bob. I used to like... I had a friend of mine, Bob Borowski. And we were diving up by Alaska. In Stevenson Inlet. It was really nasty weather. We were looking for a place to hide out. And this new packer, because we were picking sea urchins for the scumbag Japanese, and this packer, just bear with me, this packer was 110 foot. Let me type that in first. And he didn't set his anchor properly, and so he dragged anchor. Woke up. His alarm, his sounder was going off. He was in shallow water, so he just fired up his engine. He had all kinds of 500-pound bags of urchins hanging off the back of the packer. And they just leave them in the water, right? Because it's a live product they ship to Japan. And you're only picking the 3 inches, right? And it's like $700 a kilogram for the Japanese will pay for it. And my buddy Bob Borowski, my best friend, came in to unload a bunch of bags because they were going to leave that evening. And here was the packer. The anchor had finally caught. but he had put it in gear and wrapped the bags around the prop, and it was no longer working. So Bob dove on it, and they wouldn't shut off their engine anyway. His compressor, he was doing a hookah system, air hoses, was bringing in a lot of carbon monoxide, right, and killed him. He got carbon monoxide. I didn't kill him, I'm sorry. I got carbon monoxide poisoning. So I gave him 2 tanks of oxygen, and he got towed into port. He was going to go to the hospital. And they ran up on rocks in the harbor itself, went up on the wrong side of the green watch buoy, the green watch light going in the harbor, went left, right, ran it up on the rocks. The tide was rising, by the way. Bob jumped overboard, the back of the boat, and he was going to come around and pick everybody up because the boat was leaning heavy. It had a big load on board, right? It had probably 100,000 pounds of sea urchins. And the engineer came upstairs. There was nobody in the wheelhouse. He knew the tide was rising, so he just stuck it in reverse. And Bob had just jumped over the back of it, and you can guess what happened. And sad times, right? A lot of paperwork. As the workers' compensation had said to me when they came to interview me. And we were right behind them. The rest of it you can figure out on your own. Okay, let's give me one more try here. Bear with me. I screwed that up. His name was Bob Brodsky. He was good people. So he would come over to the boat because he used to tie up alongside me at night time. We stayed for 100 days at a time, diving 6 hours a day on the ocean floor. And he would come over in the morning. Would have, I used to smoke in them days, and he'd have 2 cigarettes and a pot of coffee, and then 2 cups of coffee pinched. And he would, because I would sleep upstairs on the table, right? And the rest of the crew slept down in the bunk, but because I was running the show. Anyway, Bob come in, he would kick the bunk, and when I would open my eyes, he would stick a cigarette in my mouth and then pass me a cup of coffee and start complaining because everything was so hot. He just took it off the stove. He was that kind of a guy, right? And he was probably the only person who knows can do it, get away with that. Yeah, it was very sad to lose him. He was such a good friend. This is the kind of people they're going to send in the Monticello community.
But I charge my iPhone every single night. I charge my iPad every single night. I touch that cord, I move that cord, I don't feel a tingle, I don't feel a shock. And if I lift that cord, it wouldn't hurt me.
This is in New Mexico in 2014 when the whip had a meltdown underground, and they hit it and pretended it was a truck fire. And they stayed out of the tunnels for 10 days because of a truck fire. Then they couldn't go back down because apparently there was a radiation release, which was the original February the 14th truck fire, right? So what she'd just done, where she said is like licking my iPhone charger, it's one of the strangest things I've ever heard said, but this is at a public meeting, the same kind of meeting that Valerie Myers from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission done to the Monticello community that I covered on, was a breaking story on Friday. I covered that. And this is the kind of people they're sending in, people like Valerie, people like Williams here. And their job is just to blatantly lie to you. Fix the stop leak at Xcel's nuclear plant, Minnesota, did not work, prompting a shutdown. There was no fix. Why didn't they show us pictures? Why don't they tell us where it was to? Why don't they tell us what it is? Why are they so freaking vague about it? Why are they claiming that it's tritium water in such a volume which doesn't exist at any other plant? They've never shut down a plant to fix a leak of tritium in history. So what the hell is going on? Well, they got an application in for a 20-year extension 3 months ago. They waited 4 months to tell everybody. This is they're completely out of control, and you can be sure the community is incredibly polluted. But they consider it acceptable to get a 20-year extension and bonuses and performance bonuses for an administration. Remember, 90% of the money is going to go to administration, right? That would be well below the limits of concern and amount to the limits, almost to the limits of our detection. In other words, you can barely detect it with the equipment. So, I mean, my goodness, there's no reason to be this evil. Minnesota's nuclear plant powers down after second leak in 2 years. Now the story's changed again. So this is a new one. I never heard this before. And this is from Alpha, the uranium stock site. And they show you nuclear plants surrounded by farms, as usual, rapeseed oil. Excel said late Thursday will temporarily shut down the Monticello nuclear power plant in Minnesota for repairs after detected radioactive tritium. First off, it's really hard to detect radioactive tritium when there's so many other radioactive isotopes there. That signal would have been lost in the uranium, plutonium, the curium, the armour-piercing, the neptunium, the strontium, la 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 la, and all their daughters. Leaking into the groundwater. Well, it can't leak into the groundwater nearby for the second time in 2 years. It can't leak into groundwater. It can run into the groundwater down the surface into the Mississippi River, which is right at just literally nowhere. It's all downhill. It's right there at their fingertips. It's the only spot it can roll. The ground is frozen. It's not going to get absorbed into the ground. The ground is frozen. Bear with me. We're almost through it, unfortunately. For till tomorrow night, I'm sure. For the second time in 2 years. Excel seeks 20-year license extension. March the 10th, 2023. But at that point, they still hadn't talked about the leak. Well, no, that's when he finally broke the story of the extension. And then a couple of, 2 weeks later, then it came out that they have a 400,000. And using the word leak like they done, that should be criminal, right? Like, it's absurd how many times you use the word leak in some of these stories. We'll cover that tomorrow night, by the way. So that's the Mississippi River, runs all the way down to the... that's the big map of it, right? So it runs all the way down to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean. So radioactive faller can do a lot of damage for a long distance. It doesn't, like they called it diluting. And again, that's a red flag when it comes to anthropogenic man-made radiation. You're not diluting it, you're spreading it. You're not changing the viciousness, you're making it worse because everything is tritiated. It's pulsing energy every second everywhere it's going. It's getting assimilated into everything. The West has brought humankind to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. So, United Kingdom is shipping down 55 millimeter, 155 millimeters, I'm assuming, tank rounds, which are depleted uranium munitions. Let's go through that. And so they use depleted uranium in a lot of conflicts, including in Bosnia, right? Which is suing NATO as we speak, by the way. The British Defence Ministry on Monday confirmed it would provide Ukraine with armour-piercing rounds containing depleted uranium. This is NATO. This is a proxy war, right? Where all these countries that are feeding the weapons and intelligence and monetary and everything else and influence are all NATO countries. So that was Bosnia. I got a little video clip from Bosnia you might find interesting.
Serbia is launching a lawsuit against NATO over the bombing in 1999. According to their legal team, it used depleted uranium munitions, and these have allegedly caused the rise in cancer-related illnesses across the country over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, oh, serious war crimes. My goodness. The demonic little demons. Crazy little buggers, eh? Crazy, crazy. Western countries, led by U.S., which is apparently running NATO, have NATO's, if you look it up, is 28 militaries, have decided to bring humankind to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. Russia's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Antonov, said in Washington he was responding to a statement by the U.S. official depleted uranium munitions are standard types of weapons that have been used for decades and do not pose any heightened risk, which is impossible to quantify, by the way. And there's a lot of them out there for the industry that will testify, get incredible educations, but will tell a lie and do it legally. Statements by the U.S. official depleted uranium munitions are standard types of weapons that have been used for decades and do not pose any heightened risk. As a byproduct of the uranium enrichment process, these are dirty bombs needed to create nuclear weapons. So it's already gone through a chain reaction. Right? It wasn't you can't filter this stuff to the point where you got all the radiation. The reason that it has these attributes is because it's gone through a chain reaction. So by proxy, no matter what, it's radioactive forever. The rounds retain some radioactive properties, but they can't generate a nuclear reaction like a nuclear weapon. Well, and that's not necessarily true because they're pyrophoric. They burn as they're going through the air. They travel at enormous temperatures. They release, you can't destroy the radiation, so all you're doing is releasing it into an airborne plume. This is collective punishment. One of the reasons we got a poll tonight, by the way. Does the UK deplete uranium munitions, aka dirty bombs, that are sent to the Ukraine constitute collective punishment? Well, yeah, because it targets everybody and all the species, so it's also crimes against humanity because it targets all the species. So the rounds retain some radioactive properties, but they can't generate a nuclear reaction. RAND nuclear expert, policy researcher Edward Geis, who we've covered, I don't know how many times, at least 50 times in the last decade. RAND Nuclear, this is the RAND Corporation. This is a think tank that has absurd amount of influence in Congress in the United States for quite a few decades. But when you look at all the chicken necks that they hire, that are the public speakers, you really understand, if you look at their history of lying, then you start appreciating that this is a lobbying, basically a lobbying group, a nuclear lobbying group, but with bad intentions. Commenting on this kind of nonsense is really hard. So they're trying to misrepresent by saying it's not a nuclear bomb, so it doesn't matter. But that's absurdness. If I take radiological anything and put conventional explosives around it and blow it up in your community, that's terrorism, right? If they put it in a package and blow it up in your community, they're patriots. And they destroy everybody collectively. Depleted uranium tank buster weapon of choice, that's the 155 millimeter. This is a 900-foot kill ratio. It turns everything inside a 300-foot into a projectile. Right? So it's got a 900-foot kill ratio, 3 football fields. Again, this is collective punishment because you use it in cities. The United States on Wednesday dismissed the Russians' complaint to Britain's announcement it will send Ukraine's armour-piercing ammunitions containing depleted uranium. So Russia now is putting tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus as a response to this. And all last night and all day today is just endless headlines worldwide of this posturing. White House National Security Council, who, by the way, has an arrest warrant in The Hague for Vladimir Putin, who was part of Young Global Leaders with Justin Trudeau and Angela Merkel, at the World Economic Fund, Klaus Schwab, which is a think tank, by the way, that has absurd influence, was bragging how half the Canadian Parliament actually went to their meetings at the taxpayers' expenses, which is sedition, right? Spokesperson John Kirby called Moscow's complaint a strongman argument. No, these are depleted uranium munitions. These are not strawman arguments. They're trying to say because it's not like a nuclear weapon, therefore it's irrelevant, is absurdness in overdrive. The ammunition enhances the ability to overcome defenses on the tanks. In fact, it's not. They say it's not radioactive, not anywhere close to going to the spears of nuclear weapons. Again, it is radioactive. That's why it has all these special handling causes that go with the weapons. And so, in the Gulf War, if they found a speck of this, they were to put up a 900-foot fence, 12 foot high around it, with international signs on it, not to enter that area. That's how toxic it is. Now pick it up and try to clean it up. Doug Rourke, who was tasked by the Pentagon in the United States, was tasked to go down and clean up the depleted uranium munitions in Kuwait, right? Where they killed, outside of Kuwait, where they killed all the Ba'ath Party. And everybody broke out in sores within 2 days. Right, unofficially or officially, they had used, according to a Japanese physicist at a Hamburg conference, said that the 700 tons that they use, because the A-10 Warthog shoots 1.5 tons a minute, and that the 700 tons that they had on record, and they believe it's infinitely more than that, the 800 tons that they admitted to using was the animosity equivalent of 44,000 Nagasaki-sized bombs of low-level radioactive fallout, with the attributes of millions to billions of years of anthropogenic radiation. That was, and this stuff is aerosoled as it's released. So this is 100% radioactive. It can't not be. These are dirty bombs. These meets all the attributes that you need for a dirty bomb. Yeah, it's a common type of ammunition, but it's supposed to be for hard targets. That's what the original excuse was. It's going to be for deep bunkers where they can't penetrate with conventional weapons. Now they used it on everything in Iraq and Afghanistan, schools, hospitals. So again, if Russia is particularly concerned about the welfare of their tank soldiers, they can take them back across the border. Well, it's hard to imagine Russia's not using them. Kirby said, however, that because of Mayak, right? When you look at that legacy, Russia ain't no angel. Kirby said, however, that the U.S. is not providing depleted uranium. I'll get to that. Wait till I get to that. Wait till you get a load of that, what I got. Britain's Foreign Secretary, cleverly, a nice name, cleverly, said there was no nuclear escalations in Ukraine war after Putin criticized Britain for supplying depleted uranium tank munitions to the Ukrainian forces. So we're talking about the 155 millimeters. These are massive ordnances, by the way. It wouldn't cut your throat in a heartbeat. Britain has used depleted uranium as armour-piercing shells for decades. Which is crimes against humanity. It's collective punishment too, and does not consider those rounds as having a nuke. Good for them. That doesn't mean it's not. If I take any of them and blow them up in your community, that's a dirty bomb. Russia is also known to have ammunition containing depleted uranium. Yeah, just because you got it don't mean that it's ethical or moral or not radioactive. The controversy is because it's radioactive. Not because it might be, but because it is. It's dense, it got more momentum, it keeps going through the armor, it heats up so much it catches on fire. Geist from the RAND Corporation says. When fired, depleted uranium munition becomes essentially an exotic metal dart fired at an extraordinary high speed. RAND's senior defense analyst Scott Boston said. That'll relying on them pretty heavy, aren't they? They're the apologists for nuclear industry, so that's what you're going to get. The IAEA noted that depleted uranium is mainly a toxic chemical. Yeah, and the IAEA says Fukushima Reactor 4 and Reactor 3 fuel pools were intact. They got the credibility of a shoe fly. Actually, they got more credibility. Bear with me. I know all about the IAEA. Let me show you Reactor 4, Reactor 3. We'll move on right away. That's the fuel pools are at the top of the building. There is no top to the building. So is the reactor core. That's gone too. That's the mixed oxide fuel reactor. There was multiple reactors melted down in Japan. By the way, that was supposed to be a 190-foot building with the fuel pools at the top. So when they clean it up, this is what's left. Does it look like it's 190 feet tall to you? The fuel pools at the top? Do you see the fuel pools at the top of that? Not. Is that 190 foot tall, or am I just being a baby? As opposed to the radiation hazards, so the IAEA is completely discredited. And so is IRPA, NONSCLEAR, and the IPCC. And while most, which are all UN shouldn't exist. It's just a corporation like McDonald's, right? Except it's got 195 militaries. It has no sovereignty over you. You can't arrest you or anything. But they can coerce your countries into doing dirty deeds. So can enter the bloodstream, cause kidney damage? No, it does a lot more than that. It used to be called DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material. And they got rid of the latter part of the acronym and just called it DU, depleted uranium. And to the average person that's unassuming, then they would assume that it's okay, like they're claiming, but it's never going to be depleted. That's the problem with it. And we're talking about uranium. It's depleted uranium. It's uranium. It's not lead. It's not copper. It's uranium. You can't get depleted uranium. It doesn't deplete for billions of years. Armour-piercing rounds containing depleted, which is meant to manipulate you. Uranium was developed by the U.S. during the Cold War to destroy the Soviet tanks. So once that was over, they should have got rid of it, right? Depleted uranium was used in the Gulf War. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Again in the invasion of the country 2003, as well as in Serbia and Kosovo, Bosnia. There is no threat to Russia. This is purely about helping Ukraine defend itself by killing Russia. So there's no threat to Russia. No, this was just an excuse, right? They introduced that. Russia says, well, we're going to put tactical weapons in Belarus, which is full of orphanages of deformed children because of Chernobyl. It's worth making sure everyone understands that just because the word uranium is in the title of the depleted uranium munitions, they're not nuclear munitions. They're purely conventional. Yeah, they're dirty bombs because they explode. Versus nuclear explosion, they explode by conventional kinetic energy, right? And because so much uranium, they're pyrophoric as they're going through the air to catch fire. They're purely conventional, which is simply not true. These are anthropogenic, man-made, gone through a chain reaction. it's radioactive forever. In the entire piece is uranium is what they're talking about. See, uranium is heavy. That's why they have those particular attributes. Russia would retaliate against the British decision of providing Belarus with nuclear ammunition containing real uranium. We need to step back from the madness. As soon as the ammunition explodes on the Russian troops' positions, you'll see a fearful response. It'll be a lesson for the whole planet. More posturing, right? Now, this is from the Bosnia 1995 30 millimeter containing depleted uranium used by NATO, which is 100% crimes against humanity, because it's catching fire as it goes through the air. Does the UK nuke depleted uranium munitions, also known as dirty bombs, sent to Ukraine constitute a collective punishment? Because it attacks everybody. Everybody's going to breathe it in. All the species are going to breathe it in. Nobody and nothing is immune to the anthropogenic man-made radiation. That's all I'm saying. Bear with me. Zelensky's government, who, like, when that started, I put out a video and said, should he surrender rather than destroy the property and the livelihood and the health of the millions, the tens of millions, the 30 million people in the country? Because there was no way he's going to be... What I didn't count on was NATO was going to supply him with all the weapons they could ever want. Zelensky's government told its Western allies that it urgently needed large amounts. Yeah, it is the 155 millimeter. And they've been around a long time. I've covered them a long time, 20 years. Ukraine is bursting through the shells at a faster rate than its allies can produce them. No, it's just they got a surplus of the depleted uranium. Here's an opportunity to get rid of it rather than have to pay someone to store it for millions of years. And then the original intention of a dirty bomb was fulfilled by proxy, right? In a proxy war, prompting a renewed search for ammunition and ways to boost production. They fired 5.5 million rounds a month in Afghanistan and Iraq for 9 years to get 10,000 Taliban. Should do the math on that sometime and see how many bullets they shot at each Taliban. 5.5 million. This was just the soldiers on the ground, by the way. This is not ordnance from ships and tanks and helicopters and jets and drones and everything else. The EU devised a scheme earmarking $1 billion for the swift supply of shells, missiles for existing stocks, another $1 billion. So who's making the money? The EU's not. They had to buy it off somebody. Like every other country, they had to buy it off the same people. Martin, Grumman. You know, there's 10 of them basically. A look at the uranium-based ammo the UK will send to Ukraine. This was the 25th, Saturday. And this is an older shell. I can't remember where that was from. British government announced to provide to Ukraine the type of munitions Moscow falsely claimed has nuclear components. Falsely claims has nuclear components. Again, what they're trying to say is it's not a nuclear bomb. And so it's really interesting that they ran that same story. Falsely claimed nuclear components. The munitions are not considered nuclear weapons. Well, no, everybody knows they're not nuclear weapons, but they're dirty bombs. Right? They got all the attributes of a dirty bomb. The emission of low levels of radioactivity has led the UN nuclear watchdog. Why? What do you mean UN nuclear watchdog? How did they supersede all the watchdogs in every country worldwide? How did they become the top dog? To urge caution when handling and warns of the possible dangers of exposures. IAEA says nothing to worry about. Their owners says you urge caution when handling and warns of possible dangers of exposure. I can't stand. Well, you got to quote them when there's so many better sources, right? The handling of such ammunition should be kept to a minimum. Protective apparel, gloves should be worn. The International Atomic Energy cautious, adding a public information campaign may therefore be required to ensure people avoid handling the projectiles. But they're not dirty bombs, though. You are. Depleted uranium munitions were used in the Gulf War against Iraq. No, they were used against Mercedes-Benz and Rolls-Royces full of paintings and loot from Kuwait. As again in the invasion of the country in 2003, whether Serbia, Kosovo, and Bosnia. I mean, the Canadians were there too at the time, and they should be charged with crimes against humanity for what they've done in Bosnia. The amount of people that were raped is stunning. The British Defence Ministry on Monday confirmed it would provide Ukraine with armour-piercing rounds containing depleted uranium. Byproduct of the uranium enrichment process needed to create nuclear weapons. The rounds retain some radioactive properties. They contain all of it. It's just not in fission amounts, right, where it's going to start a chain reaction or something. But it's still considered a dirty bomb. Right? Once you fire it through the air, you're releasing the property, you're aerosoling it into the environment, and the tanks you can never clean them up. Dr. Doug Rourke, who was tasked by the Pentagon in the Gulf War to clean it up, his statements clearly, he lost all of his teeth, right? Like a lot of them, and big open sores all over their bodies when they were trying to clean it up. They even shipped the tanks back, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them back to the United States and tried to clean them up before selling them in auctions for $5,000 or $6,000 to your kids. But you can't generate a nuclear reaction like a nuclear weapon. I've never heard that before. In 20 years, I've never heard that about depleted uranium. Never that comparison. That was the Rand Corporation, obviously, as a way, because we live in a different age, right? And this was Edward Geiss, who we've covered many times over the years. But the British ministry in the White House dismisses the Russians' accusations. These are dirty bombs, point and simple. You can pretend all you want that they're not, but the evidence is stunning. That the soldiers were in the tanks with these weapons when they're coming back from the Iraq War, where a big percentage of them had rectal cancer from sitting on the shells because there's not much room in the tanks, right? And that the dust from it, the soldiers, when they go home, would bring the dust with them in their laundry. And so a lot of their next generation children were born with incredible malformations. The ammunition does carry risk even if it's not a nuclear weapon. Again, see, I've never heard them denying it by saying it's not a nuclear weapon, therefore it has no bad attributes whatsoever. What is depleted uranium? Byproduct process used to create the rare enriched uranium used in nuclear fuel. Far less powerful than the enriched uranium and capable of generating a nuclear reaction. Again, I've never heard this narrative, and I'll show you some of it after. When fired, depleted uranium munition becomes essentially, it heats up and catches fire. That's according to the Rand Corporation itself, but we know that about it anyway, right? Depleted uranium to the munition fired by the Air Force is A10. You can't even keep up with a lot of it, right? Because the industry is crazy. So, I'm trying to figure why did they... Why did they... all the A-10 Warthog does is shoot dirty bombs. That's it. It shoots 1.5 tons a minute of dirty bombs. It's only 10% efficient, by the way. It hits its target 10% of the times. We need something better to get rid of that ugly sight of an A10 Warthog. There you go. That'll make me feel a bit better. The tank killer A10 Warthog. There we go. The U.S. military is still developing depleted uranium munitions, and they had to get rid of 30 million of them. I got that story. I'll bring it up in a bit. Notably, the M829A4 armour-piercing round for the Abrams main tank, which is the 155 millimeter. Which has a 900-foot kill ratio, but what happens is when you're using it in these communities, you blow up all of the, it's collective punishment now, right? So you blow up all of these apartments and homes and everything, and when they leave, the victims will come back and try to salvage blankets and utensils and forks and plates and spoons and cups and clothing, and this stuff is going to be contaminated with DULRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive material. And so in Basra, 80% of the women were having deformed children. Because of what the British... that was the British. The Americans didn't stop firing it even today, right? The cancer of war. U.S. admits to using radioactive munitions in Syria. They admit to 5,200 armour-piercing 30mm rounds. I showed you a picture of one of them earlier, actually. Were shot from the Air Force A-10 fixed-wing aircraft. These are Gatling guns, destroying about 350 vehicles in the country's eastern desert in 2015. They had used DULRAM to fire normal vehicles, not hardened targets. And the A-10, which again is only 10% of the time it hits us, the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt, this is one great big stupid disease factory, right? Studies suggest a cancer risk from depleted uranium, which is not depleted. It's not just uranium, which is used in armored-piercing munition, causes widespread damage to the DNA, the chromosomes, and it could lead to lung cancer. But all the studies will just talk about cancer, or 99.6% of them. But if you look a little deeper, you find out there's heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. These are the typical. There's around 1,800 diseases with anthropogenic man-made radiation toxic. Uranium causes health problems on the battlefield long after hostilities have ceased. And the uranium is a byproduct of the uranium refinement for nuclear power, so it's gone through a chain reaction. So it can't be used any other way. But they've got a little loophole where they can use it in depleted uraniums. What they call depleted uranium. Been used in conflicts, Bosnia, Kosovo, Iraq, and increasing concern with the health effects of the dust left on the battlefields. It's used many other ways too, all kinds of different munitions. Cancers and birth defects in Iraq due to the uranium. Breaks in the chromosomes within the cells, stops them from growing, dividing. And they use it everywhere, right? Nothing is safe to the weapons manufacturer. So that's what $238 alone is naturally radioactive with a half-life of billions of years, but it's full of the anthropogenic man-made radiation. It's gone through a chain reaction. Aerosol uranium is toxic and radiologically harmful. It's used for pigments, which is pretty rare. Industrial catalysts, which is common apparently. Counterweight for aircraft control surfaces. Ballots for ships. The scum, eh? Radiation shielding. Think about that one now. Munitions and armor. And it is. But it also used to kill and destroy the human DNA, the genetic passport of humanity. And they got many different types of dull RAM, depleted uranium, low-level radioactive munitions. There's many, many, many different species. The continuing endless scandal, perpetual scandal of depleted uranium munitions in warfare. The Balkans. The general in the Balkans for NATO said it was absolutely harmless. It was found in trees, the earths, and mountaintops. The RAND Corporation was the recipient of much U.S. and British government gratitude when it supposedly proved depleted uranium was not harmful. But again, their study was based on dust, which emanates from uranium mines and not the irradiated spray that comes from the depleted uranium weapons. Dirty little buggers, man. A 10-fold increase in breast cancer, 12-fold increase in child cancer, 38-fold increase in rates of leukemias. The dust carries death and diseases. And there's so many of these munitions, you can barely wrap your mind around it. Organic depleted uranium. Whatever, Daddy, what did you do in the Gulf War? Whatever it was, the Department of Defense said it's completely safe. That's some of their uranium fluoride depleted uranium. It shouldn't exist, right? It really shouldn't. Studies in the United States gathered to dispose of their depleted uranium shells for aircraft guns because they're going to upgrade them. So they want to get rid of 38.7 million with a core of depleted uranium used for the military aviation. This is what United Kingdom did, was getting rid of their depleted uranium munitions by giving them to Ukraine. Well, I mean, you know, if they're going to use it, Russia's going to have to use it, right? So where does it stop? Where do you draw the line? And McAllister, in McAllister, Oklahoma, which is a huge, massive military-industrial complex, by the way, they have this one community, the community itself has 4 bomb factories that only makes depleted uranium munitions. 1,800 people in the community. And all those 4 does is make dirty bombs. But they got 2,900 buildings and 2,400 storage sites they call igloos. They got 2,900 buildings at this military munition area in McAllister with an A, in Oklahoma. They've been producing it since World War I there. Now they got 4 factories that this whole town works on. All they do is make dirty bombs. Which brings us back to the question, right, of our poll tonight. Does the UK depleted uranium munitions, which are dirty bombs, because they're conventional explosives with anthropogenic man-made cores, sent to Ukraine constitute collective punishment? Because it never goes away. So it punishes humanity. It covers the whole planet. You'll find, if you didn't have Fukushima, you would have found a single from this next year in all the glaciers worldwide. Because we would have had glaciers. But because of Fukushima, we don't. New Oliver Stone documentary says nuclear is vital to solve climate change. Climate crisis. We're going to solve it. Gotta give UN $35 trillion a year, though. They'll solve it, though. They should. We'll get back to you. Oliver Stone should be castrated for what he's doing. What a disgusting... Well, that's what it is, right? You get close to the nuclear industry, and then you get infected, and then you stop being a human. That's what we see worldwide. Oh, this is a Canadian story. Hang on. Too many O's that time. I almost threw my voice out. Oh, this is extraordinary. I got more thumbs up than I got votes. I've never seen that. It's pretty rare. It's only like real controversial polls, and there's a lot of them. Some are really controversial, like this one. And there should be no controversy over this. These are dirty bombs. This is unassailable. Alberta grows links with small modular reactor sector. I was like, yeah. But then I started reading and I was like, oh, really? So they teamed up with Memorandum of Understanding. He's not going to look at anything else, geothermal or nothing like that. They're going to they signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the nuclear industry for something that don't exist. Yeah, we'll give you all the taxpayers' money you need. Don't worry about it. To make these so-called small modular reactors, which are running on mixed oxide enriched fuel. Bear with me. New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan have also been captured by the nuclear industry and signed memorandums of understandings. For the 100 ARC 100, this is the sodium, I believe. Sodium reactor. Did I say that already? Bear with me. It's a fast reactor because it's running on mixed oxide fuel. So the isotopes that is going to be released into the environment are going to be it's a breeder reactor. So it's off the same design. It's the EBR design, right? And the ones from the 50s and 60s melted down. Bring impactful net zero solutions to the province. Bear with me. Net zero, they got to brainwash you with that over and over. I'll get to it. Planning companies, small modular reactors will bring high quality jobs, economic benefits, pizza pie, and everything else. Will be a key stepping stone for the global deployment of the Canadian small modular reactors that don't exist. They don't have one into the regulatory agencies. They don't have an actual work and design. They don't have any models. They don't even have cartoons. And Invest Alberta is a crown corporation, government of Alberta. So if you don't give the nuclear industry their share of the pie each year, you can't get a job in the government, see? And so they have to give the nuclear industry. So in January, they also signed a memorandum of understanding with X-Energy Canada, who trolled me lots, for the XE Xenon 100 small modular reactors, which they don't have a design for. There's nothing into the regulatory agencies. It's not even on paper. And Terrestrial Energies. So that's 3 small modular reactor that don't exist. For neither one of them, don't even have a design in. And they signed memorandums of understanding with them. Now, these reactors are time, if they do succeed, they're very small. So geothermal is 100 times better. There's 1 billion times more energy in geothermal than the entire planet uses every day. And it's totally renewable, 100% renewable. Don't need no storage, no commodities. Dig it and tap into it and get rid of your gas, oil, coal, nuclear. And so these are going to be disease factories on top of that. They're going to be hemorrhaging radiation. So, like the nuclear industry captured Canada in the 70s, at early 70s. It was total capture. They captured basically in the 50s, right? When nuclear first showed up, there was so much secrecy that they captured the government through this so-called secrecy. There's a lot of stuff that's still wrapped up in top secret files that should be declassified 50 years ago, but then because a lot of them are still alive, then the gig would be up, right? And you would be calling for their heads. So Alberta, and of course this was World Nuclear News to come out and was gloating. But the small modular reactors, so what they're doing is hindering the Canadian industry from coming up with solutions and putting their hopes and dreams into something that don't exist and won't exist because there's too many other solutions already out there. And they're trying to exclude them with memorandums of understanding by going down that route. And this is desperation, is what you're seeing with the nuclear industry. That's pure desperation. More nuclear waste coming to Carlsbad area repository is the new contractors. That's key too. Remember that. They got new contractors now. They always show you the same stupid picture. Officials at the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, because that's what it was originally, not a plant. It's not a plant either, right? It's just a big hole in the ground. Near Carlsbad said they plan to increase shipments. Like they got done a few dirty tricks at this place. For instance, they revisited all the packages they got there, and they said, well, the top part of the package is empty, so we're going to claw that back for the quota that we're allowed to put underground, right? And so they get another 30% or something because they clawed back the original inventories. It's completely deceptive and dishonest. That was already factored into the original inventory, see? To increase shipments of waste to the facility for disposal this year by almost 50%. So the new boss is crazier than the old boss. And they're looking at, I've done the math here. Yeah, $3 billion for 10-year contract. So, which is $300 million basically a year. So basically $1 million a day at this site. $1 million a day. It's pretty easy to steal a whole chunk of money from that one, isn't it? The best spot to steal money is Hanford. Hanford dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil in the 60s, or late 50s, early 60s, just in one spot, right by the Columbia River. That's equal to an aquarium 6 feet wide, 518 feet tall, 52 stories tall, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet of nuclear waste, high-level nuclear waste, liquid. Transuranic nuclear waste disposed of at the WIP via burial in salt deposits 2,000 feet underground. Why are you going to bury low-level radioactive material 2,000 feet under the ground for? Why go to that extreme? Well, all of it's coming from the national laboratories. So it's not going to be low-level waste. They're not going to waste the only spot they got on the planet on low level, I can assure you. Facility is 30 miles east of Carlsbad. We've covered 1,000 times. And waste is brought in from the Department of Energy facilities, including February 14, 2014, when it had a meltdown. We caught that live. And energy facilities, laboratories throughout the country. So they're talking about all the national laboratories. Los Alamos National Laboratory. They got a whole bunch of laboratories, right? It's not just Los Alamos. And they're all nasty. Huge. Some of these sites are massive. Air shaft at 5,000 square miles. Air shaft at nuclear waste site near Carlsbad, halfway drilled, operational by 2026. It's going to take them another 3 years. They get a air shaft to pump air down because they contaminated the air shaft and the equipment in 2014, which is 12 years to resolve that. What they're talking about. 12 years to fix that, but they still got, I think they went through like $5 billion in the first 2 years after the nuclear meltdown that they covered up. There's an increase of about 47% from last year's total 272 shipments. So 17 shipments a week. All of it's vented, by the way. There's nothing that ships to Hanford that's not vented. And if I lick that iPhone, nothing would happen. Right, Miss Williams? Oh. We'll try it another way. Salt truck fire. Bear with me. I'm looking for the vented clip. Everything is vented. Bananas, potato chips. Nope, I just had it there. Bring it on home, baby. So this is a plant in the audience. And she's going to ask an unusual question.
Are you still getting such waste that's not vented? And
are you still getting such waste and that's not vented? Let me play that again.
are you still getting such waste that's not vented? And that could be a problem.
Okay, so that's a great question. So let me answer it more generally. There are no containers at WIP that are unvented. There is a requirement that all containers that come to WIP have to be vented. And that's not just a requirement for us to receive, it's also a requirement for the licenses that control the TruPaks that all this waste is shipped in. The containers have to be vented. We have to do headspace gas analysis.
So it's vented all the way on the highway, and it's vented when it gets there, then it's repackaged. Do you get what's going on? You don't have to vent radioactive contaminated gloves and stuff like that, see? And venting means you're releasing isotopes into the environment. That's a stunning revelation, by the way. That's such an important revelation. Because that's in their own words. That's at the town meeting. And that was a setup. Who the freak asks a question like that, really? I would ask it, but you would hear my sarcasm when the question was asked. You wouldn't hear the way she framed it. She was trying to be like just a weird. She's supposed to be just a normal citizen. We see that a lot where they put ringers in the audience, and then he goes into the big spiel about, right? And so this is a way, of mitigating their responsibilities by saying, no, well, it's natural. Everything is radioactive. The whole highway, all the little communities that pass through, and they're doing it all day, every day, year after year after year after year, doing it everywhere. Concerned citizen for nuclear safety pointed to the Department of Energy plan to increase plutonium pit productions at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Could mean new kinds of waste coming to the WIP, and the public should be informed of any new streams. Indeed. Now there's going to be 50% more streams, but the pits are the triggers used to detonate the weapons, which are never going to be used, so what's the point of making them? Because you can't cash your checks once you have a nuclear war. Public needs to see what kind of waste is being shipped, which is I'm glad that that organization is they're at least getting acknowledged. Herwood responded that regardless of the kind of ways, he was confident WIP had the capacity to meet land's need. Oh, we'll take it all. We can just dig another hole. We're committed to make sure there's no backlog. We're committed. What about safety first? Once your shipment is ready, we're sending it on the road. There's no waste waiting at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Get it out the door. And you're talking about huge, seriously radioactive materials on that side. There's plenty of capacity at Carlsbad for the waste land intends to ship. But this is legacy waste from Manhattan Project eras. This ain't going to be contaminated gloves and tools and boots at all. And they're using cast. These are like 100-ton containers for gloves. Sure they are. Oh, of course they are. He said WIP was currently in placing waste in the 8 disposal panel. The final area permitted, but they were supposed to close, but then they got a magic extension. This was supposed to be just an experiment, by the way. It was supposed to be a pilot project, not a plant. It was originally called a pilot project, the waste isolation pilot project. Just to see how the cast would hold underground in a salt mine. Because salt's not going to rust nothing. I never heard that before. To replace space lost during an accidental radiological release 2014, I covered that. And KRQE in Albuquerque came out and mocked me, took a clip of me and put it up on TV and just mocked me. And I was right on the nose. All I was saying how the radiation follower works. And called me a conspiracy theorist too. I only talk about documentation. What's the point of talking about other stuff for? I led 3-year suspension of WIP's underground operation where they spent $5 billion. They threw at it because of a truck fire. I'll show you. Wait, bear with me. It was 10 days before they went back down. There we go. And here's the truck. Here's the official truck. They abandoned the site for 10 days.
A fire has shut down the WIP site in Carlsbad. Officials say a truck hauling salt caught fire about 11 this morning in an area underground. All employees were quickly evacuated, but several were taken to the hospital for potential smoke inhalation. WIP officials say their emergency plan was put into place immediately.
That's the air vent, by the way. Look at the smoke coming out of it. That came out of there for a couple of days. And all that caught fire was the front tire, right-hand driver's passenger side tire of that salt truck, which is like no top to it, right? Because it's in a mine. And so they couldn't go back down for 10 days because of a truck fire. So then they rallied the troops and decided to go back down. And all the kitty litter caught fire and caused some radiological releases in one of the pens down there. So they abandoned 55 football field-sized caverns because of a truck fire. And they even show you the truck. That's the truck fire right there. That's why they ran away for 10 days. And then that same panel, they said, had a release 10 days later, so they couldn't go back. Unit panel 7 was filled and closed this year. Workers had to wear ventilators, self-contained breathing apparatus, Scotty backpacks, and other safety equipment when working in the area, which you don't even give to people at the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. Adding airflow could make the underground operations more efficient. The Department of Energy and Simcoe plan to continue constructions on 2 large capital projects intended to increase air available for workers to breathe in the WIP underground. $100 million utility shaft expected to be completed this year with a $400 million rebuild of the ventilation system. So the whole ventilation system was radioactive. There's the confirmation right there. You're not going to spend $400 million on the ventilation system itself. $100 million for the shaft. $100 million for a shaft. $100 million. Theft. You have no idea. The project's expected operation by 2026 increased the total airflow from 178,000 cubic feet per minute to 540,000 cubic feet per minute. So they can do waste emplacement and mining simultaneously, because their original ventilation system got contaminated with radiation. They were still using it, right? A couple of years ago, we covered a number of stories about that. And that's because they had transient workers going down there, right? They had people that were just short-term workers, 2 or 3 days, allowing waste. So they couldn't care less about humanity. They just hate us. I don't know why they hate us so much. Allowing waste emplacement and mining to occur simultaneously to put a new $400 million ventilation shafts or equipment down there. $400 million. So asked officials was needed since panel 7 was closed. Question if the lack of contamination panel 8 still necessitated filtered air. Because they're using diesel trucks and that down there, you know. Why can't you just turn on the big fan and run the operation underground without filtration? Was a preventive measure to prevent the workers from potential impact to the underground air. The place is contaminated. You can't contaminate all the air shaft without contaminating the shafts too. Right? You don't have to replace $400 million worth of ventilation equipment because it's broken. You have to replace it because it's radioactive from 2014. I know because I've been following it since 2014 and reporting on it. WIP did recently begin running an unfiltered air fan known as the 700C fan, but only when waste is not being emplaced in the underground. We only run it when we're not emplacing waste. Because you don't want to blow the radiation all over the place and set off the alarms in that section, I guess. Nuclear power gets a boost in the United States, I'll say. Dirty nuclear. The first nuclear power plant in the U.S. was the EBR-1 in Idaho, which was the Fermi experiment, Enrico Fermi. They were trying to quantify a breeder reactor producing more fission products, and it melted down, right? A couple of years later. Breeder Reactor 1 in Idaho. There was another name they had for it too. I can't remember. Probably remember when I get halfway through everything else. The Atomic Energy Act of 1954 should be repealed, right? Like corporate personhood should be repealed. Established a regulatory framework to development of nuclear power. In 1957, the Shippingport Atomic Power Station, Pennsylvania, became the first commercial power plant in the world. And the early years of nuclear power in the United States were marked by significant growth. During the 60s, the power plants were built across the country. In 1973, they had 29 reactors. And by the end of the decade, it grew to 60 reactors. And then 3 Mile happened in 1979, and that was the end of the nuclear renaissance. Again, you got to use that word partial meltdown, but now we know it was way worse than a partial meltdown, and that the releases, they claim 2 million people got radioactive doses, they said, but it was like watching color television for an extra year. And so they can't open their mouth without lying throughout history. There's just this endless, perpetual, never-ending lie every paragraph, every sentence almost. And we cover that a lot here, right? It's really something. It's this actually resulted in small releases of radioactive material into the environment. No, there was all kinds of dead pets when people came back. Right? It was Dick Thornburg didn't want to evacuate anybody because he didn't want anybody to panic because the nuclear industry told him that. He didn't know nothing about nuclear. And so he evacuated the pregnant and children 3 days later. 3 days too late. Because they didn't want... Well, see, a lot of people were transient too, right? And so they were counting on being able... Because it's so hard to link illnesses a decade or two later to something that happened, you know? 2 decades later, you got massive heart problems or liver problems or all kinds of issues. Small release of radioactivity. No, this was a huge amount. Not only that, they boiled a couple of million gallons, allegedly, right? Ernie Gunnison and Lake Barrett boiled off 2.4 million gallons into the environment, radioactive dirty bombs by the liter. Incredible radiation that had been poured over the reactor core. They can only recover a fraction of it, so the rest of it went down to New York and everywhere, or down the Susquehanna River, because it's on the Susquehanna River, right? There were no deaths or injuries from the incident. Of course there was a huge spike. There was the cancer clusters. So they go through all of these details to enforce the brainwashing. Yeah, they wouldn't lie to you at all. And that's the problem. It's so hard to keep track of all the laws for the average person. It's not hard, it's impossible. This model, this is cancer incidences within 10 miles of 3 Mile Island. Basically, think of it as a plume, a highly radioactive plume model too. So saying there was no deaths or injuries is completely dishonest and disingenuous, and it's simply not acceptable. It led to increased scrutiny, regulations. It increased opposition to nuclear power plants. No, it was the end of the nuclear renaissance for America. Since 3 Mile Island, there's 3 major: Chernobyl in '86. What about Windscale in 1957? What about Chalk River in '55 here in Canada? What about Moyak? What about impact on global? Well, Chernobyl was the end of the European nuclear renaissance, right? In '86. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom after Chernobyl. They closed all the freshwater fisheries in Switzerland after Chernobyl. The high levels from the glaciers in France because of Chernobyl. They done sex ratio studies on Europe and showed a huge discrepancy, more males being born than females, which is something that you see after a mad nuclear accident, massive pollution. So the only way you can get you would do the study if you assumed everybody in Europe was contaminated, and closing 9,400 farms all the way over in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom is evidence that it was. Next generation will likely see the rise of small modular reactors. These are the unicorns. They don't even exist. Why are we talking about them? There's only one company, NuScale, with an application, not an actual license. They don't have. It's an incomplete application. On top of that, you're talking about 1 million pieces of paper. They got to find the flaws. They got to re-engineer it before they can build something. As everything's posturing, designed to get money allocated to it before you wake up and denounce the industry itself. And it's dirty fuel. It's all dirty fuel. It's all mixed oxide fuel we're talking about. It's the worst. You're reusing reactor fuel, putting it through a chain reaction second time. That's absurdness because how toxic it already is the first time. And then you can't contain the emissions. Once you take it out of the reactor, there's no containment anymore. Everything is perpetually released into the environment. That's why we call them perpetual disease factories, which, Monticello nuclear plant, that has spent fuel pools that are hemorrhaging into the community all the time. Right? Those reactor cores that are in fuel pools, those fuel rods are still splitting the atoms. They have no containment. They have to replenish about 120,000 liters in each fuel pool each day. And each liter is going to be billions and billions and billions of fission isotopes that evaporated up the big skinny stack. Yeah, I mean, small reactors, you can put one up in your... It's nonsense. These are all dirty bombs. And the industry's just doing it to stop you coming up with solutions, right? Let's put our faith into something that don't exist rather than something that do. It doesn't make any sense to me, and so they're up to no good, obviously. Whatever it is they're up to, it's really bad for humanity. Or to replace retiring coal power plants. Again, right? They only started talking about that over the last few months, since quasi-electric, right, is going to replace all gas, oil, coal, and nuclear plants with geothermal. And they're going to use a particle beam to drill down, so it just evaporates the rocks instead of drilling through it. And anybody can do it. One of the biggest markets out there is the heat exchangers from the Earth, where you just circulate air or liquid down into the earth and back up into your home, and you can maintain a certain temperature because it's always the same temperature down below. The deeper you go, the hotter it is, right? And so that's a $50 billion a year industry right there. Small modular reactors designed to be safer and more efficient, but they don't exist. Can't be designed to do something when they don't even exist. I'll fly higher. One of my cords is loose. I can hear it in the background. My apologies. I got other cords that I'll try to remember to change it tomorrow. Going green pits renewable against farmland. This is another mad. This is such a mad. 683. So many things wrong with that story right there. Let me explain to you. I have a unique way of explaining things when it comes to nuclear. Why are almost all nuclear power plants, including Monticello, surrounded by farms? That's a question you need to ask yourself over and over and over. Not because they love you. That's the only hint I'm giving you. In Japan, they're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. And you're fear-mongering if you say it's evil. And they're growing it and shipping it worldwide. And 14 prefectures, not just the Fukushima prefecture, was banned by 55 countries for a decade. Don't worry, the depleted uranium dirty bomb bullets will fix it. I'll get back here. Hang on. 580, 680. Was it 683 or something? There we go. Yeah, right there. That's right. Nuclear energy can help the United States decarbonize its economy while protecting farmland and food security. Man, whoever wrote that is a maniac, eh? Nuclear doesn't protect anything. Nuclear is really good at destroying everything. Oh, I don't have that story there. Achieving net zero emissions by 2050 will cost an additional $3.5 trillion. Now you know why they're talking about it. Each year, annually. So they want 3.5 trillion, United Nations does, each year to fight climate change. And they're going to do it by taking away your freedom, your liberties, and massive inflation. And they don't want you to own anything. Everything is to be rented. Your pillow, everything. Just how green is nuclear energy? Nuclear energy is needs 2 external gas, oil, and coal plants just to work. So it's the opposite of green. And not only that, its emissions from the fuel pools are perpetual disease factors on top of that. El Deba Unit 1 core catcher. Well, is delivered. Look at the ship that they got to bring it on. This is going to stop the nuclear meltdown from going so-called China syndrome, right? Way down into the earth. But it doesn't, what it means is you're going to leave it at the top where it's perpetually splitting the atoms into the environment. It'll burn through whatever they're going to put there. I think it's just meant to buy them time, basically. It's meant to give you the illusion that they figured it out when you can't do nothing with a nuclear meltdown. You can't get within, if you look at it, it's called a Medusa. Because it'll kill you right away. And turn to stone. Rosatom will not only build a plant, but will supply the fuel for the entire life cycle. Yeah, Russia's one great big dirty bomb anyway. A nuclear physicist describes 7 things you probably didn't know about radioactive fallout from a nuclear bomb. And he does say there that a nuclear bomb has no comparisons to a nuclear meltdown. Nuclear meltdowns are the worst thing imaginable. Radioactive material from a nuclear explosion exists in every corner of the world, by the way. Every species is already contaminated from the nuclear war. They call it a nuclear testing, but it's the same bombs, the same radioactive fallout, right? Nuclear fallout from bombs is less dangerous long-term than from a nuclear power plant disaster. A nuclear power plant disaster is just a single one is worse than all the nuclear bombs in history. Because it's consuming steel and rebar and rocks and water and atomizing and aerosoling, ionizing and radiating it and perpetually releasing it. Whereas bombs are a billionth of a second. And they're brutal, don't get me wrong. But they don't have a candle on a nuclear meltdown. And so a bomb could be, say, 10, 20, 30 kilograms. These are tens of millions of pounds you're talking about in the reactors being lost because you're going to lose the fuel pools, right? Fallout raining from the sky is just one way people are exposed. Food is another. Just breathing it, right? And some fallout gets so high up into the atmosphere, like 50 miles up, it can remain for months to years before falling back to the surface. So it doesn't dilute, it spreads out. Whenever they say dilute, all it means is you're spreading it out because you can't destroy it, right? Radioactive fallout is at the bottom of the oceans is an understatement. Everybody has traces in them. And because animals are eating exposed surface areas like that. Potassium iodine is not going to stop cesium from going in your thyroid. And not only that, you can't keep taking potassium iodine tablets. So after Fukushima, North America, different studies from different places was 20 million atoms per liter rainfall of iodine-131. But another study was 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 with a 15 million year half-life. And other studies were sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs from the sulfur liberated from the water by spraying it on the reactors. This was the effect they knew about in the 50s. Now, they should never have done what they done in Japan. And then the xenon plumes, the cesium plumes. I'll give you an example, actually, because that's what I normally do. Here's a good example of neptunium or plutonium fallout. Yeah, so this is neptunium-239. That decays to plutonium in 2 days, 50% of it. It'll do that 10 times every 2 days. So in a very short while, the neptunium will decay to plutonium. And by the way, here's plutonium fallout from Fukushima covering the planet. And these models only based on a fraction of the releases. The other model is based on France's model of the radioactive fallout. It covers the planet in about 16 days. Excuse me. That's 16 days later. That it covers the whole planet. So when they tell you in Monticello, in the Mississippi River, Minnesota, that everything is contained on site, and you're talking about 10,000 45-gallon drums contained on site. It's madness to suggest that. New counsel for the South Bruce. Now this guy is pro-nuclear here in Canada, where they're going to put the repository in farmland if they can get the community to agree to it, rather than put it somewhere where there's no objections. And so this way they never come up with a solution. Now they had $28 billion for the last 18 years, the Canadian Nuclear Management Organization. A little tickle in my throat here tonight. Excuse me. So they pointed another councillor stepped down for some reason. Probably got a cushy job with the Waste Management Organization here in Canada, which is the industry itself. You're going to put the industry in charge of its nuclear waste. That's going to turn out really good. They already bought 1,600 acres of prime farmland. And they said, we see millions of used fuel bundles buried in a vast underground facility has divided the community, which is what they're trying to do. They're giving half the community millions of dollars, the other half, they're treating them like animals. And they don't expect any resistance. And they can't put it there if there's resistance. And it takes 5 or 7 years to look at each area. So they'll wait another 2 or 3 years of fighting. And they say, well, the community doesn't want us, so we got to look for another spot. That'll take at least another 7 years, and then the same thing will happen again. And then rather than go 1,000 miles north and dig a hole and put it down there and get it off the planet because it's always perpetually splitting atoms into the environment, right? But hey, the most watched up there wasn't that story. It was there's a Zellers coming to London. You kind of lose faith in humanity when you see stuff like that. Savannah River Disease Factory, which, wasted $30 billion in a mixed oxide fuel facility and couldn't produce it, thank goodness. But that they knew that, right? Because 90% of the money goes to administration. That's why. I guess we'll leave it there, I suppose. I don't know. That's 2 hours. My throat's tickled up. It's because you only had 1 day off, right? It happens. It's okay. I'll get some sleep. Eat some chicken soup tomorrow or something, and I'll be all fine tomorrow night. Maybe that's what we'll do. We'll pick up here tomorrow night. We got just absurd amount of great stories. And then pick up here tomorrow night and include today's batch for tomorrow night's show. And then tonight's and tomorrow's aggregates for the... Now I got 5 shows packaged ready to go that we might never get to because there's so much coming at you, right? Let's go back to the poll in that case. Because it's 12 o'clock. I didn't realize it was 12. It's midnight where I'm to. After midnight, then my carriage turns into a pumpkin, so I got to give it up. Does the UK deplete uranium munitions, also known as dirty bombs, sent to Ukraine constitute collective punishment? Well, yeah, that's exactly what it does. 100% dirty bombs is collective punishment. It's atomized aerosol as it's ejected at high speed to its target, dousing the air itself now is an invisible snowstorm of anthropogenic man-made radiation, right? And so, I don't know why somebody would say no. That's not very nice. It takes a few, though, to break them all, I suppose. So, we'll close the poll down. Way to go, poll. There's a great poll. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the poll. It looks like we were censored because we got more thumbs up than we got in the poll. We never see that, right? It's usually almost double in the poll as it is thumbs up. And so they were really upset that we were asking a question. You criminals asking questions. There's only just a few people watching these shows, right? Yeah, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. James Lucid donated 130 Canadian Friday. Bless your heart, by the way. Awesome. And anybody wants to donate, you can find the links in the bottom of my description. And it's I'm so far behind on everything I might never catch up, so well, once I had the heart attacks, everything went downhill for me anyway, right? So I'm coming back from that after surgery. I'm doing really good. And still got another month or so or more for recovery, right? But I'm doing really good, feeling good. I'm not sleeping as much. I'm down to 2 pills a day now, finally. Brain's a lot clearer. But the heart attacks, the surgery, that blew up my eyesight, right? That was really, I didn't expect that to happen. That happens. Okay, well, let's call it a night because otherwise I'll just keep yakking. I'll just keep yakking and yakking. Yakking and yakking. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Looks like I screwed that up. We'll see everybody at the right time, same place, 10 p.m. my time. Who knows what time is your time? I started 2 hours ago from whatever time it is where you're to. That's what time we're here tomorrow night. Got a lot of stories to cover tomorrow night on Monticello nuclear power plant. It'll be interesting to see what shows up in the media at this stage. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far.